The red stone canyons of the northern desert had always held their own stories, whispers of warriors, storms, lost travelers, and spirits that never fully left the earth. But none of those tales compared to the one that breathed quietly in the highest, loneliest ridges where even eagles hesitated to soar. There, hidden among the broken cliffs and ancient pines twisted by centuries of wind, lived a being who did not fully belong to the world of men or ghosts. His name was Tawas, a cute got to the rare Apache elders who still remembered the old stories. He was spoken of only in hushed tones, a giant, forged from a time when the earth shaped guardians out of stone and sorrow. Part man, part legend, Tawash had once walked among his people as a protector. Some said he was the son of a warrior mother and a spirit father. Others claimed he was born in a cave where lightning had struck stone and brought it to life. And a few insisted he was simply a man who had suffered so deeply that grief hardened him into something the world no longer recognized, whether myth or truth. One thing was certain: Tawash was alone, at nearly 10 feet tall. His silhouette cut a monstrous figure against the sky. His shoulders were broad enough to carry whole logs, his hands the size of wolf pelts. The red dust clung to the rough scars across his arms and chest markings of battles he never spoke about. His hair, long and dark, was tangled with leaves and bits of canyon dust. And his eyes? His eyes were the color of old ember stones, glowing quietly as if some fire lived inside him, but no longer had the strength to burn bright. Tawash had not spoken to a human in years. After losing those he cared for and seeing the land stained with betrayal, he had retreated into the high cliffs, carving out a solitary existence. Here, the wind was his only companion, the mountains his only shelter, silence his only peace. But even a giant feels hunger. Every day he roamed the ridges to hunt rabbits or deer, though he often let the kills go free when he remembered the teachings of his childhood, the ones that told him every life mattered. He gathered roots when he could find them, chewed bitter plants when he could not. He ate to survive, not to enjoy. The truth was simple: Tawash had forgotten the taste of real food, the kind prepared by caring hands, seasoned with memory, shaped by tenderness. Then one night everything changed. The wind shifted. He was sitting near the edge of a cliff, watching thunderheads gather in the distance, when a scent carried itself upward through the pine needles and sandstone dust. It was faint at first, almost imaginary warm air laced with herbs, roasted something, a hint of smoke. Tawash inhaled again, deeper this time, food, but not the kind the wilderness offered. This was cooked food. Food made for someone. Food filled with intention and warmth. His stomach tightened, not with hunger alone, but with surprise. His senses sharpened like a blade. The smell drifted again, stronger this time. Weaving through the canyon walls, someone, somewhere in the valley below, was cooking, and it had been a very long time since Tawash had tasted anything made by human hands. Curiosity and emotion he had nearly buried stirred inside him. He rose slowly, towering against the starlit sky, and followed the scent down the winding slopes, each step shaking loose pebbles that bounced into the darkness below. The closer he moved, the more vivid the aroma became: onions, herbs, fire-roasted meat, something sweet beneath. The smoke, his heart throbbed with a strange ache he couldn't name. By the time he reached a rock outcropping, overlooking a small cabin tucked between cedar trees, he already knew whoever lived there cooked with soul. Tawash crouched behind boulders, silent as the night wind, watching the glowing window and the figure moving inside. He didn't know it yet, but that simple scent, one warm meal drifting up into the cold mountains, was about to wake a part of him he thought was long dead. It would pull him, night after night, closer to the woman who cooked not for herself, but for a memory, and eventually for him. And so, with one cautious step toward the cabin, something ancient within the giant stirred not just hunger, but longing. The small cabin in the valley below looked ordinary at first glance: rough timber walls, a stone chimney, a sagging porch repaired too many times with mismatched boards. But to Maria Lyria, it was all she had left in the world. A home built by hands that no longer lived to warm its hearth. Maria was once known in her village as the woman who could heal with a pot and a fire. Her cooking had brought comfort to travelers, softened hardened warriors, and filled the bellies of tired children. Even after the raids, the sickness, and the scattered aftermath of loss, she kept her hands busy with chopping, stirring, grinding spices, anything to keep the grief from suffocating her. 5 years had passed since her husband, Lone Bear, was taken by a winter fever that came like a whisper and left like a storm. The sickness stole not just his breath, but her purpose. She had no children, no kin nearby, no reason to leave the valley he once loved. So she stayed. And she cooked. At first she cooked only for herself, small simple meals to keep her alive. But loneliness is a heavy thing. It presses on the chest, creeps into the bones, and fills the silence until even the sound of your own footsteps begins to sting. So one cold evening, unable to bear the weight of the empty chair across from her, she placed a bowl of stew outside her door. "For you," she whispered to the night, imagining Lone Bear's spirit wandering nearby, "in case you're still hungry." She didn't expect anything. It was just a gesture, a fragile thread connecting her to the man she once shared her life with. But in the morning, the bowl was empty, clean, not a drop left. At first, she smiled through tears. He must have come. She repeated the ritual the next night, and the next. Sometimes she left stew, sometimes roasted squash, sometimes cornbread with honey. And each morning the bowl vanished from the world as if swallowed whole. Soon, feeding the unseen became her daily act of devotion, not to keep a spirit alive, but to keep herself from fading. But the truth, one she had not even considered, was that it might not be a spirit eating her offerings at all. Though she lived alone, Maria was not naive. The valley had plenty of animals that might scavenge food: coyotes, wandering dogs, even hungry men passing through. But something about the way the bowls were left spotless, placed gently aside instead of knocked over or chewed. It felt too deliberate, too human, yet she chose to believe. Belief gave her comfort, and comfort gave her reason. Her days passed quietly. Each morning she ground corn by hand, humming old songs her grandmother taught her. Each afternoon she walked the creek, collecting herbs and speaking softly to the water like she used to when Lone Bear accompanied her. Each night she lit the fire and cooked another simple but heartfelt meal, placing it on the small wooden step outside. She always paused a moment after setting down the bowl. Not to see who would take it, she doubted she had the courage for that, but to whisper words meant for someone who loved her once, and someone she still loved fiercely. "Eat well," she would say softly, "wherever you are." She had no idea that someone was listening, someone far larger, far lonelier, and far more starved for kindness than any spirit ever could be. Soon, the woman who cooked for ghosts would learn that her meals were waking a giant and drawing him closer every night. The third night the scent drifted up the canyon. Tawach did not resist it. He told himself he should. He was a giant, a creature born of stone and shadows, not meant to step into human spaces. He had spent years avoiding paths where people walked, years convincing himself he no longer needed warmth or companionship, or the softness of another voice. But hunger, real hunger, is not only for food. And something in that scent called to him like a familiar song forgotten long ago. Tawach moved with a quietness that belied his size, slipping between boulders and ducking beneath low branches that would have scraped the sky if he stood tall. The moonlight washed over him in silver patches, carving out the broad plains of his shoulders and the deep ridges of old scars. His breath misted in the cold air, each exhale a small cloud drifting down the slope. He stopped just inside the shadow of the cedar trees bordering the widow's cabin. There, on the porch, sat a bowl of hot food. Steam curled upward like a beckoning finger, fragrant with roasted chili, wild herbs, and something sweet baked into the broth. Tawach felt his chest tighten. His people used to cook meals like this, meals meant to bring strength, comfort, and memory all at once, meals meant to be given with love. His massive hand hovered over the bowl, hesitant. He felt unworthy. This food was prepared with intention, for someone specific, someone cherished, for a spirit, he murmured, Recognizing the ritual, he remembered such customs from long ago, food left outside for those who had passed on, for loved ones believed to walk the land still. It was not meant for him, he should leave it untouched, but a gust of wind brought the scent straight into his lungs, and something inside him shuddered, something starved, not just for flavor, but for connection. For the first time in years, tears stung the corners of his eyes. He swallowed hard, overwhelmed by a longing that pierced deeper than hunger. He crouched down slowly, the wooden porch groaning beneath his weight even though he didn't step fully onto it. His fingers wrapped around the bowl. It felt impossibly small in his hands, like holding a memory. Tawach lifted it to his face and inhaled. The warmth of the food brushed against his skin, thawing something in him he thought was long dead. He took the first bite. The flavors exploded through him, rich, layered, familiar yet distant. He closed his eyes as they washed over his senses like a wave, returning him to a shoreline he did not know he still missed. A sound escaped him, deep and rough, somewhere between a sigh and a sob. He ate slowly, reverently. Not one drop spilled, not one herb or grain was wasted. When he finished, he set the bowl gently at the edge of the porch, the same way he remembered his mother doing during ceremonies, quietly, respectfully. But even after the last taste faded from his tongue, he remained kneeling there in the dark, unable to move. The food filled his stomach, yes, but it filled something else too, a warmth, a tenderness, a connection to the living world he had withdrawn from. He felt himself craving more than the meal. He wanted to know who had made it, what kind of heart cooked with such care for a spirit, and what kind of woman carried such quiet sorrow that she still hoped her beloved might return for dinner when he finally rose. He walked backward into the trees, never turning his back on the cabin, his ember-colored eyes lingering on the dim glow. Behind the window, he did not yet realize he would return, not for the food, but for the woman whose hands had crafted it. Tawach truly tried not to return. The next night, he climbed back to his high ridge after eating the widow's food, back to the cold wind and the jagged rocks that had shaped his solitude. He told himself he had broken a boundary by touching what wasn't his. A spirit meal was sacred. It was not for mortal hands, and certainly not for a creature like him. He sat in the darkness with his back against a massive boulder, arms around his knees, staring at the distant valley. The night was quiet, but inside him something stirred restlessly, like a beast pacing behind a locked gate. For hours he wrestled with it. It was only one meal. You will not go back. It meant nothing. It was a mistake, but his body remembered the warmth. His mind remembered the comfort. And his heart, his long-starved heart, remembered the feeling of being cared for. Even if the care was not meant for him. By the time the moon rose high above the canyon, Tawach knew the truth. He craved the cook. Though he had not yet seen her clearly. So he returned. He moved with deliberate slowness, making sure no branches snapped beneath his enormous feet. He approached the valley with the cautious reverence one might show when entering a sacred place. And when he reached the edge of the cedar grove, he froze. There it was again, the bowl, the steam curling upward, the aroma drifting toward him like a soft invitation. But tonight, something was different. The food smelled richer, more carefully prepared, as if the woman had taken extra time with it. And beneath the warmth of roasted spices, he sensed something more, something like longing. He drew closer, heart pounding in his chest, each beat echoing like distant drums. Then he saw her, not clearly, just a faint silhouette through the window. But even that small glimpse struck him harder than the fiercest blow he had faced in battle. She moved with slow, deliberate motions, cleaning her table, setting aside utensils, humming a tune so soft the wind nearly swallowed it. The melody carried across the valley, thin but warm, stirring old memories inside him. She looked fragile yet resilient. A lone flame in the vast dark, Tawach found himself sinking to one knee, not from fear but from awe. That is the one who cooked for me. The thought tightened his chest. He waited until her light dimmed, and she disappeared into another room before he dared approach the porch. This time he touched the bowl almost hesitantly, as though afraid the warmth might burn him. But no, it welcomed him. He ate slower tonight. Every spoonful seemed to speak of her hands, her patience, her sorrow. He felt her presence in the food more strongly than before, a gentle echo of her spirit woven into every flavor. And as he ate, he found himself watching the cabin window, hoping not for food, but for another fleeting shadow of her moving across the lamplight. When he was done, he placed the bowl exactly where he had found it and backed away. Eyes still fixed on the cabin, the next night he returned again. And again after that, each time with greater care. Each time, with deeper longing, he began noticing the small details of her life, the way she arranged the firewood, the herbs she hung to dry, the songs she whispered when stirring her pot. Each observation warmed him more than any meal could. Soon he no longer came just to eat, he came to listen, to watch, to feel close to the woman whose kindness she didn't know she was giving him. The hunger inside him had changed. It was no longer for food. It was for her. The rain arrived before dawn, hard, relentless, drumming against Maria Lyria's cabin like a warning from the heavens. She woke to the sound of it hammering on the roof, the wind howling through the cedar trees. Water pooled beneath her doorstep, rushing in small rivers across the red earth. It was the kind of storm that wiped the world clean and revealed truths meant to stay hidden. Still half asleep, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside to retrieve the bowl she had left the night before. But she froze. The bowl wasn't where she expected it. Instead of being neatly placed at the porch's edge like every other morning, it lay a few feet away in the mud, upright but shifted as though someone had set it down gently but not in its usual spot. And surrounding it, her breath caught footprints, enormous ones. Not the paws of wolves. Not the hooves of elk. Not the scurrying impressions of coyotes or strays. No, these were unmistakably human, but far too large to belong to any ordinary man. Each print was nearly as long as her forearm, deep enough to hold a pool of rainwater, spaced in strides wider than the porch itself. She knelt slowly beside one, the mud soaking into her skirt. The edges were crisp despite the storm, meaning they hadn't been made long ago. Something had been there not hours before. Her heart pounded in her chest, but not entirely with fear. She traced the edges of a print with trembling fingers. It was absurd, impossible. A giant? A spirit? A man cursed by the mountains? Old stories whispered such things, but she had never believed them. Not truly. She pulled her shawl tighter. If you are a spirit, she whispered to the morning rain, you've grown bigger since last I knew you. Humor flickered for a moment, a defense against the trembling in her stomach. But the truth pressed harder. Whatever ate the meals she prepared came in silence, handled the bowls with gentle hands, and never harmed anything around her cabin. If it had wanted to hurt her, it could have done so countless nights. So why fear it now? A wet gust of wind slapped her hair against her face. She stood and followed the footprints a few steps. They led toward the cedar grove, then vanished deeper into the forest where the ground sloped upward and the mud became firmer. She squinted through the rainfall, searching for movement. Nothing, but the forest felt watched. Not in a threatening way, but as though something enormous sat just beyond the tree line, holding its breath as she examined the prints. She turned slowly back toward the cabin, lifting the bowl with both hands. Even empty, it felt heavier than usual. "Who are you?" she murmured. She wasn't sure if she wanted an answer or feared one. Inside, she placed the bowl on her table and stared at it as she brewed her morning tea. Her hands shook, but her mind was clear. The world had changed during the night. Something had crossed into her quiet life, something she had unknowingly fed, something that had accepted her offerings with respect and silence, and something that had feet the size of stone tablets. She moved to the window, watching the forest beyond the porch. The storm raged on, but beneath the wind she sensed a presence distant, hesitant, but unmistakably aware of her. For the first time in 5 years, loneliness loosened its grip on her chest. Not replaced entirely, not erased, just softened by curiosity, and a strange pull she couldn't understand. she whispered into the storm almost without meaning to. "I'm not afraid." And somewhere, hidden in the dripping shadows of the cedar grove, Tawach heard her. He had watched her find the footprints. He had seen her trembling hands. He had waited for fear. But instead, she spoke bravery into the rain. And that quiet courage struck him deeper than any battle wound he had ever carried. The storm had passed by evening, leaving the valley washed clean and glistening beneath a silver-blue sky. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar sap, and the creek rushed louder than usual, swollen from the night's downpour. Maria lit her fire early, more out of unease than necessity. She chopped vegetables with a steadiness her hands did not quite feel, stole glances at the window, and tried not to imagine those impossible footprints. Reappearing right outside her door, she told herself she wasn't afraid. That curiosity was all she felt. But curiosity can be a thin mask. Still, when the stew finished, she ladled it into the bowl and carried it outside. Her breath trembled in the cool dusk. She set the bowl on the porch. And then she did something she had never done before. She stayed. No stepping back inside. No whispering goodnight to a spirit. She simply folded her arms, lifted her chin, and waited. In the forest beyond the clearing, Tawach froze. He had approached with his usual caution, moving only when he was sure the shadows would hide him. He expected to find the bowl waiting for him alone. But when he saw her standing there small, straight-backed, defiantly still, his heart thudded so hard the cedar. Needles beneath his feet trembled. She was waiting for the one who ate her food. Waiting for him, a mix of panic and longing swept through him. He did not want to frighten her. He did not want to shatter whatever delicate trust lay between them. But he also could not bring himself to leave. He stepped closer. Branches shifted overhead with a whisper. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Maria's heart hammered. She sensed movement, massive movement, but she remained rooted to the spot. She had lived with grief too long to fear shadows. And something deep within her whispered that whatever was in those trees was not cruel. A shape emerged. At first it was just darkness moving inside darkness. Then the shape grew taller, broader, until it stepped beyond the tree line and the fading. Daylight brushed against skin, the color of sun-warmed stone. Maria staggered back but did not run. Her eyes climbed his form slowly, the huge hands, the powerful arms, the scarred chest, the tangled dark hair. And then she saw his face, solemn, gentle, painfully lonely, lit by ember-colored eyes that glowed faintly beneath the twilight. He knelt. The earth shook softly under the weight of his body. And when he spoke, his voice was deep enough to vibrate inside her bones. "I return what I have taken," he said softly, bowing his head. Maria stared, breathless. You're the one who eats the meals?" He nodded. She glanced at the bowl, then back at him. "Why?" It took Tawach a long moment to answer. He searched for words ancient and unused. Finally he rumbled, "Because they remind me of home." The simplicity of the confession struck her harder than any monstrous sight could have. This giant, this impossible creature had come not to harm, not to intimidate, but to taste something familiar, something comforting. Something human. Her fear melted, replaced by something softer. "Then you don't need to steal? You can have it freely." He lifted his gaze, startled. His eyes glistened. She stepped back only once, gesturing gently to the bowl. "Eat," she whispered. "If it brings you peace." Tawach lowered his head in reverence, as if accepting a sacred offering. When he took the bowl in his enormous hands, he did so with a carefulness that made her chest ache, and as he ate beneath the fading sky, Maria watched him not as a monster, not as a myth, but as a soul who had been starving for far more than food. She didn't know it yet. But this night, the night she chose courage over fear, would bind their fates forever. The fire crackled inside Maria's cabin, sending warm gold light spilling across the porch where the giant ate with slow reverence. She had retreated only a few steps inside, far enough to show she trusted him, but close enough that she could still see him through the open door. Che acute ate as though each bite were a prayer, not greedily, not desperately, but with deep, aching gratitude. His giant frame seemed almost too large for the quiet world she lived in, and yet he felt more at home on her porch than any man had since her husband's passing. Maria leaned against the doorframe, arms folded over her shawl, studying him carefully. She had learned long ago that you could tell a person's nature by the way they handled food. A cruel man devoured without thought. A careless man spilled. A selfish man took and took without reverence, but this giant, this unbelievable creature held the bowl as though it were something precious. A memory held between two hands. When he finished, he set the bowl down gently and backed away from it, bowing his head again. "I have taken enough," he said softly. His voice was rough stone smoothed by sorrow. "I should leave." Something inside her cracked a little at those words. She stepped forward. "Wait." He froze as though the world itself had commanded him. Maria swallowed, nerves fluttering inside her like startled birds. If you wish to come back another night, you may." The giant's breath caught, deep and thunderous. He lifted his head, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something in his ember-colored eyes. Hope. But he did not move closer. Instead he asked with genuine uncertainty, "Why?" The simplest questions are often the hardest to answer. Maria rubbed her hands together, warming them nervously. "Because no one should eat alone in the dark. Not even a spirit? Not even a giant?" The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something trying to remember how. Silence stretched between them, soft and full. She took a small step closer. "Do you have a name? Or should I call you something else?" His chest rose slowly, as though he had to gather breath from very far inside himself. "I'm called to watch." He spoke the name like a confession. Maria repeated it under her breath. To watch. Hearing it from her lips changed something inside him. His heartbeat quickened, too loud even for his massive chest. He felt warmth he hadn't felt in years, decades, maybe something dangerously close to longing. "What should I call you?" he asked, voice low. She hesitated only a moment. "Maria Lyria, but you may call me Maria." The names hung between them like threads of woven light. He bowed his head again, but this time it wasn't reverence. It was something gentler. Something like respect shaped by gratitude. "Maria," he repeated, voice softer than the night wind. She felt the sound of her name inside him, felt the way he breathed it carefully, almost reverently, as though trying not to break it. Her cheeks warmed. "Will you come tomorrow?" she asked. "I will come," he answered. "If you wish it, I do." The words escaped her before she could stop them, and when they did, she felt the truth of them settle into her bones. Wsche acute stood slowly, towering above the cabin, a silhouette shaped by moonlight and memories. But before he stepped back into the trees, he turned once more to look at her, really look at her. And for the first time, Maria was struck by the thought that this giant, this creature of mountain stone and old sorrow, had once been a man who had loved, lost, and grieved just as deeply as she had, perhaps even more. He disappeared into the grove without another sound. But Maria stayed on the porch long after he was gone, staring into the forest with a heart that felt strangely full. Tonight, loneliness had loosened its grip on both of them. The storm broke over the valley long before it reached the mountains, rolling in like a living beast, thick-bellied clouds, dragging claws of lightning across the sky. But inside the cookhouse, where Mara stirred her pots and Enoki stacked heavy beams against the wind, the soft orange glow made the world feel strangely small, almost warm. Because tonight was different. Tonight. The storm wasn't the only thing coming. A soup that shouldn't have been made. Mara ladled, the last of her stew heavy with marrow bones, wild onions, smoked meat, and something she hadn't tasted in years, fire chili paste. She used to make it for her late husband during winter hunts. It was a heat that lived in the throat and stayed in the memory. She shouldn't have made it now. It was a dish for someone intimate, someone trusted. Someone she had no right to be cooking for. Yet when she set the clay bowl onto the table where Enoki sat, the steam rising like ghostly ribbon coils, she didn't pull back. Didn't apologize? Didn't pretend it was just another meal. Inoki inhaled once, sharply, his whole chest expanding like a great bellows. The scent hit him like a memory he had never lived, something ancient, something calling. "You made this? For me?" he asked, voice low, almost hoarse. "I made it because it's cold." Mara lied softly, but her trembling fingers betrayed her. A giant's first Inoki took a spoonful. And the moment the stew hit his tongue, he froze. Heat blossomed across his mouth, down his throat, into his lungs like a rising sun. His eyes widened, not in pain but in shock. Then something deeper. Delight. He took another spoonful. And another, faster. The warmth spread through him, comfort, fire, life. Every swallow felt like a heartbeat from Mara's hands traveling into his own chest. "Mara," he murmured between breaths. "This food." It feels like he stopped himself. Words were too fragile for what moved inside him, but Mara saw it. Saw how he held the bowl with reverence, as if it were not stew, but a gift he had no experience receiving. She tried to steady her voice. "It's just food, Inoki." His gaze lifted hotter, more present than the fire chili itself. "No," he said quietly. "It is not." The wind outside, the thunder ing, crashed against the roof, the mountains roaring in reply. The shutters rattled. The beams groaned. It should have felt frightening, but Inoki's presence massive. Warm, steady filled the room with a different kind of pressure. One that made Mara's pulse trip. He set the empty bowl down gently. Almost reverently, "You cooked warmth," he said. "You cooked care. When I eat your food, I feel—" He placed a broad hand against his chest, as if searching for the meaning. "As if I belong somewhere." Mara felt something twist and flutter inside her. "Everyone deserves warmth." His eyes softened, and something tender, too tender for a man of his size, shone through. "Not everyone receives it." Lightning cracked outside, illuminating the room. For a moment, the two of them were framed in white light, her small, steady presence, his towering silhouette, like two mismatched pieces that somehow fit perfectly, and then a sound. A thud, heavy, close, not thunder. Both of them turned toward the door. Inoki stood first silent, but immense, moving to guard her without thought. Mara felt a chill glide down her spine. Someone was outside, through the storm. Through the dark, coming toward her. Home. Inoki's expression hardened not with fear, but with something far older, far more dangerous. A silent vow. "You stay behind me," he said, voice quiet as a promise. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs, not because of the danger outside, but because for the first time since her husband died, someone was standing between her and the world, someone who cared, someone who craved her warmth as much as she craved his presence. The door shuddered once, just once, under the weight of a fist that wasn't knocking so much as claiming permission to enter. Mara stiffened. Inoki did not. The giant Apache stood unmoving, shoulders squared, body angled to shield her completely. The fire behind them cast a deep glow across his back, stretching his shadow long and wide, like a guardian carved from the mountain itself. Another blow struck the door. Not violent. Not desperate. Intentional. Measured. Someone who wasn't afraid of the storm. Or of whatever they would find inside. Inoki tilted his head slightly. "Listening," Mara whispered. "Do you know who that is?" He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. The man in the DORW, when the door creaked open. The wind didn't rush in, it stumbled in, caught behind the silhouette of a man standing in the frame. Tall, weather-beaten, wrapped in a worn military coat, a white streak cut through his dark beard like lightning frozen mid-strike. But Mara noticed one thing before all the rest. His eyes. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Inoki. "Didn't expect to find you here," the stranger said. His voice was low, with a rasp that had traveled long miles in dry wind. Inoki did not step aside. "And he did not relax, Mara," he murmured, not looking back at her. "Go behind the hearth." "I'm not hiding," she protested. "It is not hiding," he corrected quietly. "It is staying safe." The stranger's eyebrow twitched, curiosity flickering through uncertainty. "She's yours?" he asked, gaze drifting toward where Mara stood. Inoki's jaw flexed. a subtle movement that carried more meaning than words. She is not yours to speak of, he replied, the air shifted. Tensed. Threat crackling between the men like leftover lightning. Name dropped like a este one finally. The intruder stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat. He looked at Anoki with the familiarity of someone who shared a past that hadn't ended cleanly. You're far from your tribe. Anoki. Marat's breath caught. This man knew his name, knew his history, maybe even knew why a giant Apache warrior was living in the lonely valley below the mountain, silent, isolated, carrying unspoken grief like a second skin. You should leave, Anoki said. Wish I could. But I'm not here for trouble. The stranger softened his tone. I'm here for a warning. That word sparked something in Anoki's gaze, a flicker of sharp awareness. Who sent you? Anoki asked. Nobody had to send me. The man's voice grew quieter. There's movement in the south, riders, men with maps and government papers. They're coming up through the valleys. Mara felt a hollow chill spread in her chest. Riders? Government papers? This land wasn't claimed. She was alone, Anoki. Even more so. What do they want? Mara asked, stepping forward despite Anoki's protective arm. The man turned toward her then. His expression shifted, gentle as if seeing her clearly for the first time. They want the land, he said, and anything on it. Mara felt her stomach knot. Anoki's voice turned hard. And why warn me? The stranger looked at him for a long, heavy moment, because whether you like it or not, we used to be brothers. Old wounds, new fears, the word hung between them. Brothers, not by blood, no, the tone was wrong for that. This was something made in conflict, not in family. Soldier and scout, protector and outcast. Two men tied together by something broken. Marat's heart thudded unevenly. Anoki had never spoken of any brotherhood. Never spoken of a past that involved any other. Man who might bow his head under a doorway and lock eyes with him like an equal, and she could feel it. This was not a meeting of friends. This was a meeting of unfinished business. The stranger sighed, rubbing a hand across his forehead. Anoki, listen. When they get here, this place won't be safe for you. Or for her. Anoki's expression darkened like a gathering storm. She is under my protection. The man nodded slowly. That's why I came. And then the night shiftdd outside thunder cracked. Inside, silence held its breath. Anoki stepped forward, every inch of him a quiet, coiled warning. You brought danger here, he said. You should go. A shadow crossed the stranger's face. I didn't bring it, he murmured. It was already coming. Before Anoki could reply, a distant sound broke through the storm. Hoofbeats. Marat's blood turned cold. Someone else was out there, more than one. The stranger's expression tightened. They're early. Anoki turned toward Mara, his voice low and steady despite the threat gathering outside. Stay close to me. But Mara already knew the quiet life she had built, the fragile trust forming between her and Anoki, the warmth they had shared only hours ago. It was all about to be tested and maybe broken. The hoofbeats grew louder. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the storm left the valley slick with mud, making every step sound ominous in the otherwise quiet night. Mara clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. Anoki stood at the edge of the cabin, massive and unmoving, a living barricade between her and the approaching threat. The strangers had arrived earlier than expected, riders armed with rifles and papers, men who cared nothing for the stories of spirits, giants, or widowed cooks. They only cared for land, for profit, for control. Mara watched them from behind the low wall of her cabin, the shadows of their shapes stretching long and menacing across the mud. The battle for the Kabanoki did not hesitate. His towering form moved like a mountain, a shield of stone and muscle. The first man tried to enter, swinging a torch to scare him away. Anoki caught it with one hand, the heat barely making him flinch, and hurled it into the creek, extinguishing the fire with a single splash. Another aimed a rifle. Anoki's eyes followed the barrel, his immense hands moving faster than any human could imagine. The gun clattered harmlessly to the ground. He did not strike to kill, he had never been a killer, but each movement carried authority. The silent warning of a force beyond comprehension. Mara pressed herself against the wall, feeling the heat of the fire behind her. She trembled, not with fear for herself, but with awe and worry for him. Every strike Anoki made, every move of protection, reminded her of the sheer power he possessed and the bond he had chosen to form with her, the cabin BORNS in the chaos. One of the men's torches fell against the corner of the cabin. Mara's heart lurched. Flames licked the wooden boards, quickly spreading toward the roof. Smoke filled the air, stinging eyes and throat. She wanted to scream, to run, to stop it, but Anoki's hand was on her shoulder. "Firm, steady, stay," he commanded, and she obeyed. Rooted by the force of his presence, he moved with precision, kicking debris, lifting beams, creating barriers with his enormous strength to prevent the fire from spreading further. The cabin endured some damage, but Anoki's determination kept the structure from total collapse. Still, ashes fell like snow around them, coating Mara's hair and the edges of her shawl, the CONFESSION, when the last of the intruders finally fled into the rain. Defeated, but not entirely gone, Anoki lowered himself to the ground, kneeling near the ashes where the fire had threatened to consume everything. Smoke curled around him like a ghost of past losses. He looked at Mara, not the woman he was protecting, but the woman whose life had been entwined with his in these short, impossible nights. "I have never," he began, his voice unusually soft, a tremor betraying him. "I have never felt this before. Not food, not warmth, not safety, not companionship." He paused, eyes burning like emberstones. "I ate the food, but now I crave more than meals. I crave the cook, not her cooking her heart." Mara's breath caught. The wind carried the smoke, the ash, and the weight of his words. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, to the devastation around them, to the ember glow of something ancient stirring between human and legend. She reached out, her small hand resting against his massive one. He looked at her, startled by the gentleness in such a gesture. "Then stay," she whispered. "I no longer want to cook for ghosts. I want to cook for you." "For us?" The tremor in his chest eased. He exhaled slowly, the ember in his eyes softening. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to hope that he could belong, not just in the valley, not just in her home, but in her heart. Outside, the storm had faded. The mountains were quiet again. But inside the cabin, amidst the ashes and remnants of fear, something stronger than fire burned, something like love. The valley seemed different in the dawn that followed the storm. Mud glistened in the first pale light, birds cautiously emerged from the cedars, and the creek's song was louder than usual, as if celebrating survival. Mara stepped outside, her eyes scanning the partially charred cabin. Though some boards were blackened, the structure remained intact, thanks to Anoki's strength and careful defense. The morning air carried the scent of wet earth, smoke, and a faint trace of herbs, a reminder of the meals that had begun to bridge the worlds between them. Anoki knelt near the porch, examining the ash-stained ground. Mara watched him silently, noting how even in his immense frame, there was care and patience in the way he handled the remains of their shelter. He looked up, catching her gaze, and, for the first time, the distance between legend and humanity seemed to vanish. "The first steps of partnership I will rebuild," Anoki said, his deep voice carrying both promise and resolve. "Not alone." "With you?" Mara nodded, a fluttering in her chest. She realized that for the first time in years she was no longer preparing for ghosts or memories. She was preparing for a life with someone tangible, someone present. Together they began to work. Anoki lifted beams that Mara could barely move, positioning them with precision that belied his enormous size. She sorted nails, repaired shingles, and swept the floorboards with hands that trembled less with fear and more with anticipation. Their movements, though unequal in scale, were synchronized by a quiet rhythm born of mutual respect. A home of their Meike-Anji. Over the following weeks, the cabin transformed. Anoki expanded it to accommodate his size, reinforcing walls and carving doorways tall enough for him to pass without stooping. He crafted furniture from fallen trees, sturdy benches, and tables large enough for both of them to share meals without crowding. Mara, in turn, adorned the space with herbs hanging from rafters, small clay pots, and woven blankets. She cooked meals that nourished not only the body but the soul, and Anoki began to notice subtleties, the way she hummed while chopping, the pauses she took to taste her creations, the careful arrangement of each dish. Nightly they shared firelight, sitting side by side, her small hand sometimes brushing against his enormous one. They spoke little at first, letting trust and familiarity grow silently in the shared space. Over time, conversation emerged stories of lost family, of childhood in the canyon, of battles fought and friends buried. And in each story, Mara saw Anoki's gentleness, his capacity for loyalty, and the depth of his heart, the gentle power of Elovio evening. Mara set a meal before him, a simple stew of roasted roots, seasoned with herbs he had never tasted but had learned to love. Anoki looked down at it and then at her. "You've given me more than food," he said softly. "You've given me home." Mara smiled, the faintest curve of warmth touching her lips. "Home is where we care for each other," she replied. "Where we are safe, where we are known." Anoki's eyes softened, embers glowing in the firelight. Slowly he lowered his massive head until his forehead nearly touched hers. It was a gesture both monumental and intimate, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged. In that moment the valley seemed to hold its breath, the mountains leaning close as if to witness the union of human courage and giant strength, of loneliness turned to companionship. A legend begins in the weeks that followed. The valley became a place of quiet magic. Mara and Anoki moved through their days in tandem, building, cooking, sharing. The story of the giant who once wandered alone and the widow who fed ghosts began to whisper through the canyon, carried by travelers who glimpsed their lights in the evening or saw a shadow larger than any man moving across the ridge. But for Mara and Anoki, it was no longer about legend. It was about the simple, profound truth of life rebuilt together. Their partnership was a sanctuary, a fortress, and a home not just of walls and beams, but of trust, devotion, and a love, born slowly like a seed rooted in fertile soil after a harsh winter. The giant and the widow, once solitary figures, had found in each other the warmth that neither had known they were missing. And the valley, vast and wild, seemed to welcome their union as if it had been waiting all along. The valley had changed. Not by law, nor by conquest, nor by the passage of strangers with maps and rifles, but by the quiet, unstoppable force of two hearts intertwined. Mara's cabin, once a fragile refuge for a grieving widow, now stood strong, a testament to resilience, courage, and love. Its timber walls, reinforced by Anoki's massive hands, carried the warmth of countless shared meals, laughter, and whispered stories. Smoke curled from the chimney like a banner, announcing life to the mountains, the river, and the wind. Anoki stood outside one morning, the sunlight glinting off his dark hair and broad shoulders. He gazed across the valley, listening to the wind whistle through the cedars and the creek rushing toward distant plains. His eyes, still ember-colored, held a calm clarity. He was a giant no longer defined by solitude, grief, or myth. He was home. Mara joined him, her small hand slipping into his enormous one. She looked up at him and smiled, a gesture filled with both mischief and tenderness. "You're going to crush the herbs again if you're not careful," she said, noticing how he gently fingered a sprig of sage he'd gathered that morning. He chuckled, a sound that rumbled through the valley like distant thunder. "Then I will crush only what is ready to grow stronger," he replied. His eyes softened as they met hers. "Just like you and me." The miracle of simple THINGS days became weeks, and weeks became months. Together they cultivated the valley, planting gardens, cooking hearty meals, and repairing cabins abandoned by those who once feared the giant. Travelers who passed by would speak in hushed tones of the widow and the giant, of how her laughter echoed like wind chimes through the canyon, and how his immense shadow moved like a guardian spirit over the land. The story spread not through exaggeration or myth-making, but through observation of the simple miracles they performed, a healed creek bank, a rescued fawn, a cabin restored, Mara's cooking nourished not only Anoki, but anyone who came seeking food or shelter. And Anoki's protection was legendary, not violent, but unwavering, like the mountains themselves. Yet more remarkable than the work they did was the quiet intimacy they shared. Each evening they dined together beneath lantern light, sharing laughter, stories, and dreams. Anoki's giant hands cradled the bowls Mara served as though holding something sacred. Mara, in turn, watched him eat with awe and admiration, remembering the night he had first tasted her stew, and the night she had realized that the heart of the giant she feared was as tender as her own. The Valley Arimean BRS years passed. Seasons cycled through fire, snow, and sun, but Mara and Anoki remained constant. The valley seemed to honor them in return. Birds nested in the cedars. Deer grazed without fear. The wind carried their laughter to peaks and canyons. Their story, first whispered like a ghost, became a living legend, the widow who fed spirits, and the giant who craved her heart. Children who wandered too close would see Anoki tending the garden, immense and patient, and Mara guiding his hands with gentle laughter. Travelers spoke of warmth that could only exist when two souls found one another in a harsh and untamed world, and in the quiet moments, when the fire crackled and the valley slept, Mara and Anoki would sit side by side, hands entwined, sharing a simple meal. No words were needed. They had learned the truth that had drawn them together so long ago. Love could be nurtured, protected and fed, just like food. The legend lives own. They became more than a widow and a giant. They became a story carved into the landscape itself, a story of courage, of companionship, and of hearts that refused to remain lonely. And in that story, every meal, every shared glance, every quiet touch was immortalized. Tawach had once wandered the mountains alone, haunted by grief and hunger. Mara had once cooked only for ghosts. Together they transformed the valley into a home where giants could learn tenderness, widows could find strength, and love could bloom in the most unexpected places. And so, long after their footsteps softened into legend, the wind still carries the aroma of her cooking, the sound of his laughter, and the story of a giant who once ate the food and found he craved the cook.